Alright, before we begin, there are a few points that I need to clarify. I wasn't originally planning on creating this video, but after the Best Designs precursor, it's become by far my most heavily requested content. I'm willing to go into this territory, but only if you fully understand that this is an opinion piece. That applies to any video in this style, but it's especially important in this case due to the unusually negative nature of this content by my standards. The words "in my opinion" don't always carry as much weight as they should, and while I'm far from the largest Smash YouTuber, I have reached a size where I've seen a small subset of my audience, I suspect largely on the younger end, refer to me like a voice of authority. To clarify, I am not. I have attempted to provide evidence to support my claims, and will be speaking with largely objective language to improve the flow of the script, but this will ultimately still be a very largely subjective video, and my own judgment of a character's design shouldn't affect your enjoyment of playing or watching them in any way. I'll also be using tournament footage of the mentioned characters, as is typical for my format, and it's vital to understand that none of the criticism in this video is directed at the players featured. In a competitive setting, there's one objective that matters: winning. If a character's toolkit rewards a user for playing in a way that a large portion of the player base would find boring or unpleasant, that's an indictment of the character's design, not the player's decision to use an optimal strategy. To wind this down, I'll be evaluating design using the same criteria as in my Best Designs equivalent, so you may want to start there, and the level of detail in these analyses will tend to grow from character to character as the list progresses. Let's do it. Luigi is designed to be a wacky, over-the-top bag of tricks character, and I need to emphasize this: he largely succeeds in doing so. This analysis will be shallower than the upcoming entries, as his placement here is almost entirely due to the existence of a true zero to death off of a single grab. This works regardless of your opponent's DI, although their choice will alter the actions you need to take to perform the combo and are difficult to react to, so in practice it's true that Luigi players don't always pull it off, but it's also true that they frequently do. This creates an extreme, unreasonable amount of risk when engaging Luigi at low percents, to the degree that players are arguably better off retreating to a platform and voluntarily taking hits from below to push themselves out of the percentage window for this combo. Now, will all competitors take this approach? No, but there is a case to be made for it, which isn't a situation I'd ever expect to see in a character designed flawlessly. Other common complaints towards Luigi include numerous alternative kill confirms from his grab, along with the invincibility of Luigi's Cyclone, which turns juggling scenarios into a guessing game for short-ranged characters. Considering that Luigi is blatantly designed as a grappler with an otherwise horrendous disadvantage state, though, these come across as considerably more acceptable tools to be given and wouldn't put him on this list by themselves. Now, is a true zero to death unreasonable under any circumstance in Ultimate's environment? I wouldn't necessarily say so, but when it's initiated with an option as simple, long-ranged, and non-committal as Luigi's grab, it crosses the line into oppressive territory. Hero caused a borderline riot in the competitive scene when he was released last year, and is the character by far the most reliant on randomness we've witnessed so far in the Smash series, with a 1 in 8 chance to critical hit on all of his Smash attacks, and a completely randomized selection of 21 spells to pull from for his down B. Several of the spells within this menu contain randomness within the randomness, including the chance to instantly kill his opponent or itself cast a variety of status effects or any other spell on the list. Even among the spells which don't have further inherent luck involved, the options you're presented with vary wildly in quality, from briefly turning yourself into metal, borderline useless, to this, an all-encompassing energy blast that obliterates anything in its path with little chance of escape for many characters. And I'm fine with all of that. Okay, that's a bit of a stretch. Magic Burst in particular is maybe somewhat overtuned, but I have no fundamental problem with a character based around RPG-esque random outcomes. These kinds of mechanics still require plenty of skill to execute successfully, allow the character to better represent his home series, and also add some whimsy and entertainment to a battle, which I think has genuine merit even in a competitive sense. There is, however, one incredibly large flaw in this character's design that can't be overlooked, and if you were around during the release period uproar, you likely know what I'm going to say. the language barrier issue. If the switch is set to a language that you don't read, which will be a common issue for traveling competitors, for example, you have no idea which spells Hero is being presented with. An absolutely critical piece of information needed to try and counteract them. It's technically possible to try and learn just those individual phrases by sight, but without rigorous practice, this will still lead to considerably slower comprehension than a native speaker's. Icons beside the spells would do wonders for solving this issue without being unfaithful to the Dragon Quest series, although frankly that would be a minor concern to begin with and should absolutely be implemented in a future patch. Overall, Hero isn't too bad, being an intentionally crazy character with powerful resource-based spells balanced by sluggish frame data and poor combo options. A few areas may be a bit over the top, and stopping to read the spell menu whenever your opponent pulls it out can be annoying, but to reiterate, Hero's core design isn't what's on trial here. As long as this UI issue exists, he needs to be here, as it flies in the face of Super Smash Bros.'s typically heavy emphasis on accessibility. Whereas the first two characters on this list largely earned their placement from flawed individual aspects of their kits, we're now moving more into fundamental design philosophies which I feel could use some reimagining. Olimar's almost total reliance on his Pikmin to participate in meaningful combat is extraordinarily faithful to his home series, but also makes the character feel as disconnected from the fray as he does in his home series. One of the most rudimentary aspects of combat in video game design is selling the power of an attack, and an enormous portion of this comes from animation techniques paired with appropriate sound design. Take a look at this smash attack from Ryu. He winds up to anticipate the strike, connects quickly after the attack begins, utilizing his body weight, pauses for impact on hit, and follows through strong. This makes an attack feel powerful and overall satisfying, and intuitively imparts the idea of a strong hit to anyone looking at the screen. Now switch over to Yoshi, and you see the same principles at work. And again, with this heavy attack in Dark Souls 3. And again, with this powerful Hearthstone card. While their respective games' mechanics vary wildly, there's no mistaking the power behind each of these strikes, accomplished through meticulous design and redesign. Now, in comparison, let's look at Olimar's biggest attack. Mechanically, it's still very devastating, but this information isn't strongly passed on to the players. This isn't simply a result of being a projectile attack either. These principles can still be applied to that category, and looking at a number of other projectile-based killing blows in Ultimate, Smash Attack or otherwise, we don't see this same problem appear. The obvious distinction is that Olimar is not himself performing an attack, but rather commanding a separate entity to perform it. Unlike, say, Bayonetta, who still attacks alongside her Wicked Weaves, Olimar can't do this due to his role in the Pikmin series as a commander, meaning that the appropriate action for him to take here is to issue a command, which realistically has a very limited ability to sell impact. Any sense of power, therefore, has to come from the Pikmin themselves, and with their extremely small, simple bodies and the need to be almost instantaneously airborne, this isn't very viable to do. This command action also extends to his other smash attacks, and even worse, to his grab, which has an animation nearly indistinguishable from his forward smash. Because of Olimar's small body, stubby limbs, and his silhouette being constantly broken up by the Pikmin, it's also difficult to distinguish either of these from his side special animation in the heat of battle, even though this one actually features direct interaction from Olimar and therefore ironically looks more weighty, despite not even causing a flinch with most Pikmin types. In Olimar's home series, where combat is one portion of a larger whole, these actions weren't jarring at all. But in Smash, an unabashedly combat-centric game, they stand out painfully. The typical experience of fighting Olimar involves having a variety of projectiles launched at you with varying functions and power levels, but little distinction between these, made even harder to gauge with only a minuscule triangle to indicate which Pikmin is next in line. This admittedly will affect some players more than others. My eyes personally are less than 20/20, but there will certainly be plenty of Smash players with worse vision than mine, and with many characters in Ultimate receiving useful UI elements on their character portraits, it's very odd that Olimar wasn't included in this camp. Now, to be clear, this character has an extraordinarily high skill cap, can utilize the Pikmin in very creative ways, and the concept of playing a resource management minigame in the midst of a fight is a genuinely inspired idea that wonderfully represents the real-time strategy series Olimar originated from. but this doesn't change the sense of frustration many players will have when facing him, or the myriad of ways he breaks game design conventions in a negative sense. Look, Olimar was always going to be a challenge to implement into this kind of environment. His canonical abilities are far too concrete to be ignored, but also wildly at odds with the way platform fighters typically function. Even within this context, though, I think his design could probably use another pass. Little Mac is an interesting concept, which at first glance seems sensible enough to pursue. After all, there had been ground-centric Smash characters before, and glass cannons, and characters with poor recoveries clearly implemented into their kits in order to balance out other strengths. So if this approach was going to be pushed to its extreme at some point, what better character to apply it to than a boxer, exclusively known for using his fists? I imagine something similar to this thought process was used during the creation of Little Mac's design document, but after 2 games of this design with very little iteration in between, some fundamental problems with it have become very apparent. To begin with, platform fighters are extremely aerial focused compared to the vast majority of traditional fighting games, with Ultimate arguably placing the highest emphasis on air movement seen in the series. Jumps are near instantaneous, both leaving the ground and reaching their apexes remarkably quickly, meaning that they have high functionality both as a general positioning tool and an escape option, in addition to priming near uniformly dangerous aerial attacks which are atypically safe to use and rewarding, thanks to their low landing leg. Near uniformly, with Little Mac being an extremely notable exception due to all 5 of his aerials being as close to useless as this type of attack can get, meaning he becomes borderline defenseless the moment his feet leave the ground. To further enforce this trait, he's burdened with one of the worst recoveries in the entire game, if not the literal worst. So, in one of the most air-based entries in a game genre dominated by aerial presence, Little Mac has no air game, so what's he get in return? Well, as you might expect, the answer is power and speed on the ground. His speed is excellent, and a legitimate selling point of the character, but when we get to talking about power, things start to break down a bit. While it's reasonable to say that a lot of his normal attacks are above average, with the exception of his armored smash attacks, they're not significantly above average, certainly not to a degree worth largely sacrificing an entire dimension of movement for. Like any fighting game genre, platform fighters are centralized around options and counter options. An abundance of available options in multiple scenarios is a key component in determining a character's strength, and by essentially removing an axis of movement and the arsenal of attacks that would accompany it, the decision tree available to Mac in most situations is considerably narrower than the one available to his opponent. As a result of these factors, Little Mac generally isn't considered to be very powerful and is a frequent recipient of balance patch requests, but fixing this while maintaining the core identity of the character is no trivial task. Granting his smash attacks super armor and allowing KO Punch to go through shields were clearly attempts to mitigate some of the discrepancy in options, by turning what would otherwise be correct decisions by the opponent, attacking an opening or blocking an attack, into incorrect decisions with heavy consequences. While this may help, however, it doesn't come close to fully closing the gap. So how could we fix him? Well, one option might be to double down on his position of strength by boosting the power of weaker elements in his ground game, particularly his throws. Alternatively, the aspects of him that are already good, his ground speed, his smash attacks, his KO meter, could be made even more potent, leaning even further into this concept. Both of these approaches, however, would only further discourage his opponents from interacting with him, which we already frequently see. Probably not the best end goal for a game centered around combat. Alternatively, his aerial performance could be improved to disallow this kind of behavior, but doing so to a degree that would be effective would almost certainly leave him overtuned. In any case, the fact that he's explicitly told in his announcement trailer clearly indicates that boosting his air game would be going against the core design idea for the character, which might actually be the approach that needs to be taken. Little Mac in his current iteration is an extremely polarizing character that often leaves one side or the other feeling frustrated at the end of a fight, but this wasn't inevitable. Super Smash Bros. Has hosted other characters that canonically stay very grounded, but are given more well-rounded movement for their combat iterations, and I think tapping more into that approach would put Little Mac in a better position for a considerable portion of the player base. I think the best approach to take for Mac, provided he returns for the next next Smash title would be to heavily rework him, granting him additional aerial utility but toning down some of his more excessive high points. He could certainly remain ground-centric, but in his current form, based around the extremes of Smash's movement mechanics, attempting to balance him by tweaking an attribute or two is a fool's errand. Even if it wasn't, design isn't solely about balance. The concept of a grounded boxer is intriguing to a lot of players, and he received significant attention during the launch window of his debut, but ultimately there are a lot of significant pain points that make him unpleasant to play even for a lot of people who are interested in the idea. Now, you can certainly make the argument that niche characters are allowed to exist, but I'd say that a ground-focused fighter in a game like this already puts him in a niche. A fighter who has no capabilities outside of ground combat and routinely kills or is killed at 40% exists in a niche within a niche. And while rounding out his moveset would make him less appealing to the select group that does enjoy this extreme playstyle, it would also open the character up to many more who love the core idea but can't come to grips with its harsh edges. I'd consider that a worthy design goal, but until it comes to be, Little Mac stays on the list. Our honorable mention for this video goes to Captain Falcon, here entirely because of his dash animation. Captain Falcon is a speed demon character, heavily centered around lightning-fast ground movement designed to emulate the reckless and pinpoint piloting of F-Zero machines. And yet his dash animation uniquely forces him backwards when turning around, and is also very short-ranged. To see this character's typically energetic and flashy movement neutered so harshly is just unpleasant, and goes wildly against his archetype, with essentially every other character on the roster feeling more responsive to use on the ground. Speed. A single word that outlines Sonic's entire concept, a word which has infamously caused numerous headaches for the team in charge of his series. Extreme speed is a hard concept to introduce to many genres. In his 2D and 3D platforming adventures, level designers were tasked with creating enormous worlds in order to give him adequate space to run around on, and the programmers with creating intensive physics and collision detection systems to keep him on those paths, with mixed results. While speed isn't impossible by any means to implement in a video game, it does inherently create additional challenges that must be overcome, and because Sonic inarguably would have to be extremely fast when transitioning into the Super Smash Bros. Series, implementing him was always going to be difficult. Even so, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that the approach taken with Sonic throughout the Smash titles, Ultimate included, has been underwhelming in a way that extends outside those inherent challenges. Sonic is the fastest runner in the game, and two of his special attacks, the Spin Dash and Spin Charge, are both burst movement options with near identical functionality. This does create a character centered around mobility, which matches the feel of Sonic's home series, but also makes evasion the central theme of his playstyle. These mobility special attacks are extremely versatile, reasonably non-committal, and provide good reward, whereas a large portion of his normal attacks and aerials are average at best with a considerable amount of lag, meaning that leaning on mix-ups with a handful of special attacks is often the optimal choice. Because these are charge moves, they require space to set up, and creating this space is obviously not a significant challenge for a character with such an extreme ground speed. This retreat to charge to attack or feint will typically be looped many times throughout a match, creating large chunks of gameplay which are relatively shallow and uneventful. This would be enough to put Sonic on the list, but numerous other issues are what move him to the top. A notable and much maligned one is the overuse of Sonic turning into a ball during his attacks, which was almost certainly a concession to allow his last-second implementation in Brawl due to its ease of animation. Oddly though, it's been maintained throughout 3 iterations of the character now, while many of his other abilities obtained through the course of his series have been completely ignored. Now, Sonic is known for rolling up in a ball form, and it would be odd if the Spin Charge or homing attack were missing from his kit. With that said, it also exists for another special move with heavy design overlap, his neutral air, his up smash, and even his down throw, which makes his moveset feel somewhat homogenized and contributes to this Smash iteration of Sonic not paying significant homage to his canonical appearances. This is something that many Brawl veterans are unfortunately guilty of, but Sonic particularly so, as many of his remaining animations are also based on other fighters, again originally likely as a time concession. This is another common issue raised by fans, and there have been a lot of proposals made for altering his kit to skew closer to his home games. I'd personally recommend this video by Dr. Upali, but to highlight a small, not even vaguely comprehensive list of powers Sonic has utilized outside of Smash, He can drill through the earth, perform a flying X-kick, ride a hoverboard, wield a sword, generate a gravitational field, dash through the air at the speed of light, become a werehog, swing a hammer, and generate various elemental shields. Now, I think you'd have a tough time arguing in favor of all of these being represented in Smash. While I'm sure there are fans of the idea of a werehog meter forming the basis of Sonic's moveset, it's not the foundation most players would opt for. But compare this colorful, entertaining set of powers explored through Sonic's decades-long career to his Smash appearance. A couple iconic attacks, a few references to a forgettable arena fighter, and some lifted animations, combining into an entity that neither provides satisfying representation for fans of his home series or enjoyable combat for many Smash players when fighting against him. I think that more than any other character in the series, Sonic requires a thorough overhaul. There are many ways that this could be enacted, and again, plenty of more passionate Sonic fans than myself have already chimed in on this, but if it ever does happen, I hope to see a fresh iteration of the character that both honors his own games and provides meaningful incentive for Sonic to play in a less evasive manner, which the mandatory elements of his design are strongly biased towards. What about, say, becoming more powerful as he moves and lands attacks, which could loosely evoke the boost formula that defines modern 3D iterations of the character? A mechanic like this wouldn't be mandatory, of course. Project Plus, a mod of Brawl with an emphasis on competitive gameplay, folded a version of Sonic into its roster who doesn't utilize any such gimmick and has still been much better received overall by that game's player base. There are many valid ways of tackling this problem, but it is a problem to tackle. Throw in even more nagging issues such as his notoriously unreliable up air and the accurate yet grating sound effect of his spin charging that will be repeated countless times throughout a battle, and as unfortunate as it is to say about such a landmark figure in the world of video games, Sonic takes my choice for the worst designed character in Ultimate. Here's hoping for a reimagining in the future. Thanks for watching, everyone, and hey, if you liked it, why not leave a like? Did you agree with this list? Have a different one in mind? Any thoughts on individual characters? Let me know in the comments. And of course, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, follow me on Twitter to see what I'm up to, and check me out on Patreon for exclusive content, early video access, Discord, and other cool rewards. Later, people! Temple, or Hyrule Temple as many have called it over the years, is one of the most enduring, iconic stage entries in the Super Smash Bros. Series. In its introductory game, Alright, the concept of a well-designed Smash character will change quite a bit depending on who you ask, so here are a couple points of criteria that I personally looked at when I was making this list. Will the player